I'm going to make an argument. And tell me if I'm wrong in this argument at the end, and you guys, I guess, can write it down in the comments. But the greatest tragedy of 2020, at least from the standpoint of the political space, was not, at least from the standpoint of the left, Sanders losing. It was Sanders leading a mass capitulation. There's a great difference in those things. Bernie Sanders joined the political contest. He joined the political contest not to play politics. He joined it, primary reason, in order to get power, to get things accomplished that he believed were problematic, and that he had tens of millions of people backing him saying, yes, those things are problematic. And those people would show up at the stadiums, and those people would be there. A large group, a majority, that agrees with him on issues of policy down the line, but that for whatever reason in their heads believes that Joe Biden is the guy and has to be the guy. And so Joe Biden wins on the issue of electability, but from the standpoint of policy, Joe Biden loses. Meaning, real terms, Sanders wins the policy argument and yet loses the debate. Now the catch becomes, what are you in the race for? Now, if your name is Joe Biden, you're in the race because you want to be president. If your name is Bernie Sanders, your principal and primary reason is to become president in order to do X, Y, and Z. Meaning your policy proposals is the reason that you're in the race. And those policies were popular. 72% want to expand Social Security, 69% want to expand Medicare for all, 67% want $15 minimum wage, 67% want to legalize marijuana, 64% want to tax extreme wealth, 64% want to support unions, 64% or 3% want a Green New Deal, 58% want to cancel student debt and expand free college universities. You won the policy argument. You lost the electability argument. In fact, you didn't even fight on the electability terms. And so we are here in this undignified position where you lose the contest. And fair enough. Your power is not in the Democratic Party, believe it or not. Your power, if your name is Sanders, is within those tens of millions of disaffected people that are out there who are not being represented by either party and that are basically being told to go kick rocks and vote for the other guy, meaning you have nowhere else to go from the standpoint of Democrats. With a smug point of view, oddly enough, that it is their responsibility to get Joe Biden elected as opposed to Joe Biden's responsibility to get their votes. Sanders' power lies in them, the disaffected voter, the person who's not being represented, the person part of this group that wants those policies and that believe that Sanders can make it. The catch here is you have a lot of other people who are voting for Joe Biden who also want those policies, who have just settled and acquiesced to not accepting and getting those things. The majority of people who are voting for Joe Biden are doing so in order to get Trump out of office. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We have 30, 40 million people out of jobs, about 40 million potentially getting thrown out of their houses. 30, 40 million people that don't even have health care in the midst of that pandemic. And even people that do are going to be eaten alive by medical bills. This is in the midst of fires in one part of the country with hurricanes in the other. I'm making the point that this goes beyond the Great Depression. This is the Great Depression many times over. And your political candidates in both parties are running as if they don't care. It is your job to get them elected, not their job to get your vote and attend to their needs. Now, when you ask me, or when I make the argument that the biggest issue for the 2020, or the saddest, or the biggest tragedy is not that Sanders lost. Sanders is a man, and he's running in a party that is absolutely against that man. And in doing so, being against that man, they did every rational thing that they could do, which is to make sure he loses. But Sanders, again, is not in the race for the specific reason of just being president to be president. He's in the race to get things accomplished. Meaning him losing the contest is not the same thing as him capitulating on those items that he's pushing for. If you are indeed looking to upend the system, if you're indeed looking for Medicare for all, and you lose the Democratic primary, what is your response? To capitulate, or to turn around and say, I am standing under this banner of policy. And if the Democratic Party wants my support and the support of all of these millions and all of these other lefty groups that are out there, I encourage you to behave the same way, then you should back Medicare for all. It is unconscionable that I even have to make the argument. But there are 20, 30 million people out there that are going without health care. And it is, for me, to be a warrior and champion for those healthcare policies. You get our vote when you represent our interests. And I can encourage these people to vote for you if you indeed represent their interests. This is two things. Either the Democratic Party appropriates that position and say, okay, fair enough. In which case, he drives a huge amount of energy into the party, basically doing the party a favor that it couldn't necessarily do for himself. And it should be more than one policy. Let's say Medicare for all and elimination of student debt, or whatever those chain of policies are. Force the party to appropriate the position, in which case energy is driven into the party. Or the party tells you to kick rocks, which is also just as interesting, because it means that a man who they cast the apocalypse, meaning Donald Trump, who will, if he wins, House, Senate, Supreme Court, presidency, checkmate, across the board, they're willing to tank it, as opposed to appropriate policies that the majority of the American public supports. That is interesting in and of itself. Are you okay with that? Understand what I'm asking you. If you're okay with your party, tens of millions of people step out and say, we're done. And let's say for the moment that the progressive Democrats, instead of voter shaming, turn around and say, hey, those guys are right. Why aren't you representing their interests? I mean, for God's sake, 88% of Democrats, of us, support Medicare for all. 70% of the public supports it. Those guys are right. Why aren't you backing those policies? And they should do that, by the way, because after all, they also will most likely back the brace policies that we're talking about. In which case you have a resonance of working outside and inside in order to try to get things accomplished by people who agree. That's what they should do. That's what they should do. But that's not what's happening. And ultimately, you've had Sanders, who has been backing Biden. No, the saddest element of this is the capitulation. For the first time in a very long time, you've had clear indication that your policy positions were the ones that were popular. It is not up for grabs anymore. It is clear. You have 88% supporting Medicare for all. That's great. That's a monstrous number of Democrats who are supporting that policy. How do you walk away from that without anything? At which point does the left say, I'm done? And I'm making the point that the tragedy here was not that Sanders lost. It was that he was a company man and that he didn't walk out of this and say, I'm done. You get our vote when you represent our interests. Because that, under those guidelines, is an issue of power. That is when you recognize that my job is not to be a company man. My job is to get these items accomplished. The question really is, would the Democrats have appropriated the policies, or would they have tanked it to Trump in order to stop the public from ever getting so uppity as that they would make such a demand? That's the question. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This is Sanders boosting Biden. Listen to this.
This Wall Street Journal headline says, as Kamala Harris joins Biden ticket, Wall Street sighs in relief. And Bill Daley, former President Obama's chief of staff, now with Wells Fargo, told the Wall Street Journal, quote, I think Harris is a reasonable, rational person who has worked in the system. Is she a progressive? Yes. Is she someone who wants to burn the building down? No. I think she wants to strengthen the building. If Wall Street breathes a sigh of relief with Kamala Harris being named to the ticket, what does Bernie Sanders do?
Well, Bernie Sanders does every...
Ouch. Ouch. That hurts, right? Let's make it worse. This is Wall Street Journal. I'm sorry. Where is it? Washington Post. Right here. Washington Post. Front pages. Washington Post. First paragraph. When Joe Biden released economic recommendations 2 months ago, they included a few ideas that worried some powerful bankers, allowing banking at the post office, for example, and having the Federal Reserve guarantee all Americans' bank accounts. But in private call with Wall Street lenders, the Biden campaign made it clear that those proposals would not be central to Biden's agenda. They basically said, listen, This is just an exercise to keep the Warren people happy, and don't read too much into it. And one investment banker, referring to the liberal supporters of Senator Warren, the banker who spoke on condition of anonymity to describe private calls, said the message was conveyed on multiple calls. Don't think too much of the Warren stuff. That's not what we're here for. Here's another point. Right here. Here's another stinging line that is monstrously obvious on day one that Sanders had to already know about. The Biden campaign said the economic recommendations were produced jointly by Sanders and Biden and were never intended to be official policy. The Biden-Sanders task force made recommendations to Vice President Biden and to the Democratic Platform Drafting Committee, said campaign spokesman T.J. Ducklow. The anonymous source appears to be confused and uninformed about this very basic distinction. Meaning, those task force were worthless. You come with nothing. You come with nothing. And you leave with absolutely nothing. You get theater. And that theater basically says, hey, we're going to have a task force because we want to kind of get these Bernie people in line and make them think they got something, when really they got nothing. The honest reality of it is the only way for you to have gotten anything out of this political process was for Sanders to recognize that his job is to fight for policy, not to fight for the party. Those are different things. They're dramatically different things. And when I say dramatically different, I mean having somebody go out and say, we're done with this farce. We're in the middle of a pandemic, for God's sake. And with righteous indignation, make the argument, make the point that it is the responsibility of the candidate to get those votes. And Sanders being opposition and recognizing my job here is not to be a company man. My job here is to get these policies over the finish line. And we, at this point in 2020, with all of the polling and everything that was done, recognize that the energy that is in this party is coming from these policies. Now, Biden can strut around all he wants and pretending as if he had it locked down, but there's a potential that he could lose. And from my standpoint as Sanders, it is in the best interest of not just the country, but even in the best interest if I want Joe Biden to win, because I think it's better for him to appropriate those policies as opposed to me lying down. The biggest tragedy was the laying down. It was laying down in the context of winning the policy argument. How do you get 88% support for Medicare for all and lay down? And not just lay down, lay down, like a bunch of people drinking suicidal Kool-Aid as opposed to actually fighting for the things that they believe in. I understand for the past 40, 50 years, this has been the normal way that you've operated. But the distinction here is two things. One, you get a man on the campaign stage that the majority of the public supports in regards to policy. He is winning. They think he's going to run away with it. And they always tell you, you have nowhere else to go. But each and every one of them was willing to tank the party if it meant stopping Sanders. That means in putting a position of you have nowhere else to go, they decided it's better for the Republican to win. Because there is no way that any of them would have won if they would have ripped it out of Sanders' hands, meaning the nomination from Sanders' hands. Your bias here. It needs to change. And I understand how in the previous years you might have been cowed into this belief that your ideas weren't popular and all this other stuff. 2020 was not that year. 2020 was the year that history, the Ark of History as they call it, required you, all of you, to stand up and support those policies and to not be willing to just perfunctory or just redundantly or just automatically back the random Democrat. That was the biggest tragedy this year. It was understood that the policies was popular. It was understood that Sanders wasn't really having this fight on issues of who's more electable and all this other stuff. He wouldn't even call a lie in many respects. It also was understood that at the end of it, he was going to give the vote away to Biden. And that's the saddest part, because this was the year that you had the opportunity to fight. And this was the opportunity where if all of these people would have said, we're done, then an issue occurs. A demand has been stated by a large segment of the population, tens of millions of people. So many, in fact, that it is impossible for the Democrat to get elected with that number of people balking and refusing to support the party unless that party backs specific, explicit policy. Do they accept it or don't they? And if they don't accept it, that would mean that they're willing to take the world or take the country to a maniac because the public has created a demand that they don't want to acquiesce to. If they do support it, they will drag energy to the party that allowed them to win the race organically. I'm making the point that the cowardly approach was not the way to power. The cowardly approach is the thing, in fact, that have all of you laying down right now and accepting Joe Biden with Bernie Sanders basically saying Joe Biden shouldn't take it as if it's in the bag. Why are you saying that now, Sanders? You knew what he was going to do from day one. You knew that task force was bogus from day one. And you sheepdog your people into basically this guy who now you're saying, hey, maybe you need to be a little more lefty. Hey, maybe you need to pay attention to those task force. We're going to push like hell when he gets in office. You have no leverage. You have no power. You have nothing in this process from here on out. Your power would have been in the beginning where you would have pushed, bitched, moaned, and said, my vote and my support is contingent upon you backing X or Y. That's the failure of this term. And that's the saddest part to me. When I try to make the point that it's not about Sanders, it's not technically about Sanders. It's about us and how all of these people, millions of us who want the same thing, out of cowardice, would acquiesce to basically a party that is not pushing for the policies that you want, or for that matter, that the American public wants from a standpoint of the majority of the public itself. I think that's the saddest part. I'll leave it here. Like, share, and subscribe. Give me 1 second. I just want to check something. This year had so much promise. Honestly, it did. I mean, there was so much potential for 2020. And I don't mean just Sanders winning or losing. I mean going beyond this notion of basic politics of automatically backing X or backing Y. But taking a more proactive approach to recognize that politics go beyond just you putting in a vote, or it goes beyond just that primary. It goes to those people who are on the streets. It goes to those people who are out there protesting with signs and whatnot. But it also goes to people saying, I am no longer participating in this without this. And the public making a firm demand in regards to what the public wants. Until the public gets to that point, unfortunately, nothing will change. And the saddest part is that the AOCs of the world, the Sanders of the world, the TYTs of the world, basically led the left out to be slaughtered for an exact same process that's taken place over the last 40, 50 years, with this year could have been something fundamentally different. Marcus Will told you from the start that the candidate wasn't it? Yeah, that's fair enough. Flint led Snyder. Oh, that's the other point. I was going to say Bernie Sanders, along with Snyder from Michigan that led water, along with John Bolton, warmonger, along with a list of other Republicans, will be backing Joe Biden also, including Mitt Romney, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. Bob Ramirez, Flint-led Snyder supports Biden. Yes, that's true. Answer my question. Please don't flip it. Trudy, I answered your question, but it's not a flip. That's the issue that the left doesn't fundamentally get. The question itself is not absolute. The question itself is a thing of perspective. Do you think it's the candidate's responsibility to get your vote, or do you think it's your responsibility to vote the candidate in office? My argument, it is the candidate's job, philosophically, to get your vote. At the moment that you stop allowing that to be his job, you are no longer in a representative government. You're in something else. I don't care if Satan himself is on the other side of that dispatch box. It is still your job to hold that candidate accountable. Your question that you need to engage and that you need to honestly deal with is, are you indeed in a representative government or not? If the candidate is strutting around telling you to go vote for the other guy, and the other party basically has the same gimmick where they can say, you go vote for the other guy, basically your lot in this is found in neither party, and they know it. You're being scammed. And it's time for you to break that scam. And part and parcel to breaking it is confronting it directly, making it overt. Are you indeed in a political process where the party structure pays attention to the interests of the public, yay or nay. If your answer is no, then I think you have other things that you need to deal with. And again, it's the job of the candidate to get your vote, not the other way around. And if you had 20, 30 million people to make that overt, make that clear and overt, meaning you either accept it or you don't. You either accept the demand or you reject the demand. Accepting the demand allows you to bring all sorts of political power and whatnot into your campaign to win it. Rejecting the command does not. I think some Democrats are terrified of even answering that question on whether or not the demand would be adhered to, or whether or not they would take it to a man who they're calling the apocalypse, as opposed to listening and appropriating something that would win them the election. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.